Hi everyone. Today we'll be understanding the JavaScript is. It is different in different contexts, so we'll try to understand what it means. So first of all, like we just opened a JavaScript console or like just ran this the global scope. So the value of this is the same as the global object. So in the context of browsers, it is window. Like if you ran this in Node, I think they have a different global object. So it is not window in that case because you can run JavaScript in backend also. So if you had the strict mode. So in JavaScript, you can enable a strict mode using use strict at the first line. And if you again console the value of this, you will get the same thing. Like there will be no difference. You'll get the global window object as this. And when you do this equal to window, you'll get true. Now, what if you did this inside of a function? So if you had a function and you console this, you'll again have the same result. You'll get the window object. But if you used strict mode and then ran a function, what you will get is undefined. The value of this is undefined, and if you're using the strict mode, and clearly this equal to window will be false. Now, this has something called implicit binding. So here you can see like you are calling. So suppose you defined a function, and this function is not defined inside the object. It is just a function. But you have done this binding, like you have made it a property of that function. You have assigned it like fun, like colon, the keyword, like the key fun is assigned to the function, this function, and you did object.fun. So now we have the value, like inside this function, you have console.log this.a, and you can ask the question whether this.a will be this value global or will it be this object value. So you might have guessed this, it will be object, because on the left hand side of this function, you're calling it with obj object, and so that becomes the context for this, and this will print this particular a. Now this is called the implicit binding. So since you're not said specifically that go and bind the value of this to a particular object, this is called implicit binding. The left hand side of what you call the function with, that will define the context for this. Now something very interesting happens is that now you have done the same thing, like these steps were all same, but you did one more thing. You took the object.function and you assigned that reference funref to a different reference. Now you called it. Now you might expect that the value of this.a should be object because you have done that because it's just the same thing. But it turns out that the value of this is global. So this is called this is why implicit binding is confusing, because here you can see that funref doesn't have that left hand side object.fun, even though the reference is there. You don't have that left hand, and the implicit binding is lost. So implicit binding is also lost when you have an inner function. So outer function, so we have the exact same setup. So you have obj, you have this function outer, you have outer assigned to this inner parameter, you are calling obj.outer, like this is the same sort of structure. But inside outer, you are calling inner. You're defined the function inner and you're calling. So what do you think will be the value of this dot a? Like anyone can try.
I think only function outer will be called.
This dot a, what will be the value of this dot a? Inside the inner function, two consoles, and there will be one console here, one console here. So what do you think will be on this line?
So the first one will be, I think, obj, and second one will be for inner, second also. I think it should also be obj.
So this is what is interesting. So when you call it the outer function, it is obj. But in the inner function, it is the global variable a. So this is what we call the loss of implicit binding. So you might have thought that just because the value of this in the outer function is something, it should carry over to the inner function. But you are seeing here that inner, we are not calling inner. There's nothing on the left hand side. So we're not calling obj.inner. We are just calling inner. And that will mean that you will lose the implicit binding. So this is why this gets a little confusing. Now, I have changed one thing here. So you had function, func, like function, and you had this arrow function. Now, arrow function, what do you think this will happen? This is exactly the same code, but only that part has changed. So what do you think will be this dot a in the outer function and this dot a in the inner function?
Now it is like inner function will use the scope of outer function. So it will be the same object.
Yes. So when you do inner, when you have this arrow function will take the value of this as the outer function. So you will not lose this binding. So this is why if you don't want to worry about this, you should use this arrow function. And that is the rule in Google also. So you cannot use like when we are passing some callback, etc. We use the arrow function for that reason. So again, you have a similar setup. You have the outer function. You have a set timeout. Inside that set timeout, we are creating a function and passing it as a callback, and you are consoling the value of this. So again, what do you think is the value of this dot a in the outer function?
Object and global.
Object and global, yes. So again, you will have that loss of implicit binding. When you do obj.outer, you have implicitly bound outer to the value of this, but that will not continue in the inner function, like set timeout. So again, in Google, we have this rule that we don't we will use arrow function. And when you are using the arrow function, you will have consistent outside also obj and inside also obj, right? So now you can do explicit binding. So far what we had was implicit binding. Implicit binding occurs when you have on the left hand side of the dot operator, you have some object, you call it, so it's implicitly bound. You can explicitly bind using a bind object. So you have explicit binding through bind will not be lost when you pass around to a callback for a new reference. So you're calling this. So what do you think is the value of this dot a here?
DJ. Oh, because it binds with it.
Right, because we bound it.
Yeah.
Now there is another way to do this. There is call and apply. Call and apply, like they take in parameters, like but the first parameter is the this parameter. Like if you don't want to, if this function were to take in parameters ABC, so when you're calling, you can call like call obj comma a comma b comma c. Like you can pass in the parameters. But the first parameter is the this context. So again, what do you think will be the value of this? I think this is obvious. And with apply also, you have the same, like it's a way to explicitly bind instead of like putting something on the left hand side and then trying to understand, like you can call it like this.
So in apply we can use array or
In apply you can use array for the parameters,
array or
and in call you have to like pass parameter one by one, like comma separated. Now there is what we call a precedence. So explicit binding versus implicit binding. So let's see the code. You are doing where a global, you're defining a function which consoles this dot a. You have obj1 and you have a as object one, right? So the object one has a like a key, and that value is obj1. Now you have a function binding. Now this function binding is used the typical bind syntax, and you have bound the value to obj1. Now you're creating another object. You have the fun keyword, and to that you have this function bind, and you're calling obj.to.fun, which will call this. So what do you think will be the value of this dot a?
so it is binding with obj1, so obj1 should be
OBJ1, I think.
So yes. So even though in the left hand side of obj2, like this particular line, you're having obj2. So you might expect that the value of obj2 should be, so you should have obj2 here. But the explicit binding has a higher precedence than implicit binding. So implicit binding, it should have been obj2, but it is obj1. So that means that explicit binding has higher precedence than implicit binding. So what do you think is the value? So there's one more way to create a brand new this. So the new keyword, when you do a new function, like this is how we create an object. This is like a class, and you instantiate a class using the new keyword. But what also happens in the background is a value of this is created. So what do you think is the value of here, this dot a? Will it be global or what will it be? Global?
So I think it hasn't any like in function there is an like this context, so it will use a lexical scope. I think that will it will take a global.
It will take global. It will take undefined, because when you do new, it will create a brand new empty object and assign it to this. When you do this dot a, like if you were to do this in TypeScript, you would basically get an error because it will say a is not defined. Like how are you accessing it? But since it is like regular JavaScript, you can access it and you will get the value undefined. So the new keyword will also create a this, like a brand new this, and this will not be the global, like the global value, right? So you have precedence. So you have explicit binding, which has when the function is called with call, apply, or bind. This is higher than implicit binding. When you call it like there's a left hand like object from the dot operator, and you have the default context, which is undefined in case of strict mode, and it is otherwise it is the window object. Or if you're using Node, it is like getting global object. So many questions.
Like when we pass the object, like in call and apply.
Call was
If we pass the object in call and apply, if there is no property of a like in that object, so it will point this property. It will print out print undefined, or it will point out the global a. There is no a property in that object.
No, it will not take. Like even in this case, in new, when we are using new. So even though there was no like this did not contain any a, so it did not pick up global.
Okay.
It will say it is undefined.
Okay.
That's how it will work. Any other questions? So there's this JavaScript book that I got this from. Like it's called "You Don't Know JS Yet." JavaScript. Yet. Okay. And this had like this exhaustive, like what is the value of this in all these different scenarios. So it's not obvious.
पर उसमें तो एक जो मतलब उसका एक वॉल्यूम पूरा दिस पे ही है.
Like JavaScript is very tricky. Like you might think you know. Like if you're coming from a Java background or something, you might think that it's obvious, but like you have seen so many different scenarios in which it's not obvious like what the value of this is. Correct? Like if there's no further questions, we can wrap this up.